On today's episode, we're going to take away from the trade rumors, the trade speculation, and all of that. And I want to look at something that we could see start plaguing the league, mainly because of the second tax apron, the way that the contracts have ballooned, and overall just some teams that may not hit the ceiling that they happen. With the Celtics moving Jaylen Brown, it was not just a blockbuster, but it was something that I think could be taken as a warning shot around the league. Because of the new second tax apron era that we live in, teams can't just pay every star, every starter, every role player, and assume that they'll figure it out later. With the rules getting tighter, flexibility getting smaller, and if you're expensive but not truly elite, the pressure comes fast. So today, we're going to ask, which NBA core could be next? Which duo could be broken up because of a Celtics-style decision? Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley? Are the Magic going to do it with Paolo and Franz? We're going to talk about it all and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBAC.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of the Full Court Podcast. I'm your host, Haize, but more importantly, you can follow the channel at the Full Court YT, whatever podcasting app and platform of your choice. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it for today, man. So the Jaylen Brown blueprint, right? Is this a one-off move, or could we start seeing this be more of an NBA trend? And one could say maybe we started seeing it a little bit as well. Maybe the Memphis Grizzlies were an example of that, with them trading out Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr., even though their situation was different because that team had seen declining results. The Celtics made a move with trading Jaylen Brown at a time period where, Jason Tatum just came back from injury. Yes, they had a disappointing exit from the playoffs, but, when you look at both contracts over $50 million between Brown and Tatum, and could this become a trend around the league? And I think that's the first conversation we have to have with this one. The side of this that, yes, this could become a league-wide trend is that the second apron, it punishes teams that get expensive. And, for a league that said that it wanted to keep or make a way for teams to keep stars that they developed, it also has put a opposite effect on that. Yeah, you can keep the stars that you develop, but if you draft well over time, or if you keep adding talent, eventually the bill becomes due on that, right? So if you don't win the titles, or if you're not winning championships, not just one, are you going to be able to justify keeping those longer, expensive cores together if they're just good or just competing? And while I know there's been a lot to come out about the Boston Celtics that made it more than just about basketball, there's some reported other things that were going on there, but I do think money still driven a lot of that, right, conversation. And if a duo has reached its ceiling, moving one star before the value drops, that's what teams can take a notice of. You do not want to wait until you have to move a star and the value is going to drop. And because now flexibility is almost as valuable as the talent that you use that flexibility with. And so Brown's trade may be remembered as the first major kind of second tax apron domino that sets off a number of moves for disappointing teams with huge balloon salaries, right? And I do think, though, the other side of this is that Boston's situation was unique. Brown had a very specific contract, a fit, and a relationship dynamic with that Boston Celtics team that played a part into it, right? Not every expensive team is going to be willing to trade a star in their prime. They're going to be willing, much like the Denver Nuggets have done, to change everything else around them and re-up on the role-playing talent, then trade their stars. And I do think that some teams are going to just look at a tax bill and say, listen, if we feel like we're truly competing or close to a title, we're going to be willing to pay whatever it takes to get there. Now, it does come with limitations, but it is. And winning changes everything. Expensive teams only question when they stop advancing far enough that justify that. And the Celtics had year of evidence before making that ultimate decision that they did with Jaylen Brown, right? So the second tax apron does not force every team to panic, but it does force every team to be honest about where they are. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the teams that could be forced to make the decision. First up is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Paying for a title team or an Eastern Conference Finals ceiling. That's what the question is here. Are the Cavs one of the most likely teams to face this decision? One could say that they already did in a little bit of a fashion with trading Darius Garland, getting in James Harden. James Harden hasn't been re-signed yet. That is expected with LeBron coming there. But I do think when you look at the roster of the Cleveland Cavaliers, you got some expensive players and expensive money that's there. And if the Cavs do not make an NBA Finals, and God forbid do not win an NBA Finals, can you justify paying Evan Mobley? And for the way, I don't know if I said this earlier. One way that I'm qualifying this is I'm trying to look at teams that have multiple players making at least $50 million. That's kind of the area. Teams that have like 3 or 4 players making $25, $28 million. Because that's more easily broken up, I'm not really looking at that. But with Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell, right? And I guess you can throw Jarrett Allen in that as well, and we'll see what James Harden ends up re-signing for. could you eventually have to make a decision? You do have Donovan Mitchell, who's over 30 now. You have Evan Mobley, who's 25. And if the Cleveland Cavaliers keep disappointing, regardless of how you feel about Evan Mobley or Donovan Mitchell, this isn't necessarily about how you feel about them as players. Could they be forced to move on from one of those guys if this team keeps disappointing? There's no doubt that the Cleveland Cavaliers are very talented, but the question is whether the group is good enough to justify living around the second tax apron permanently if they keep not making it NBA Finals. That's a question that you have to ask there. If you're not making the finals, the playoffs, the payroll becomes harder and harder to defend. But I will say this. I'm not saying that they should break them up yet. I'm not saying that this is going to be a decision that happens this offseason. This is just more so a thing that could happen with these duos later on down the road. Mobley is still a long-term defensive anchor. And I do think eventually you may want to move Mobley to center. We'll see. Donovan Mitchell is an elite offensive engine. There's just no doubt about that. I do think the Cavs can move more secondary salary like a Jarrett Allen before they move a Evan Mobley or a Donovan Mitchell, but it is something to watch as you keep going on. Harden and Allen are most likely to be addressed before Mitchell or Mobley's addressed. That's just my opinion on it. And while the East is kind of always looked at as wide open, I do think the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be able to make a conversation for themselves that there's enough to keep trying to make a run. Cleveland's not in panic mode. They shouldn't be in panic mode. That's not what this episode is about, but you do have to look at that. The next one, especially that has a young core, I think you have to look at is the Orlando Magic, right? And the Orlando Magic could be forced to make a tough choice if they keep disappointing. The Magic were expected to be this team that would going to make this leap and going to be in the NBA Finals or the Eastern Conference Finals for years and years, and they just haven't done that. And while they don't have salary that's yet over $50 million, you do have Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, who by the end of their contracts in 29-30 will both be making $51 million respectively. And you have Desmond Bane that's making 39, 42, and $44 million over the next 3 years as well. You throw in Jalen Suggs in that as well. This is no doubt that the Orlando Magic have some big salaries when it comes down to it. But specifically, Paolo, Franz, and Desmond are all very expensive. And paying 3 max-level players only works if your offense or your team overall really becomes elite. Orlando remains in the second tax apron. The roster math is getting a little bit more difficult for them every single year to make drastic improvements. And with Desmond Bane and Franz Wagner, those guys could become pressure points if they decide that the Orlando Magic decide that Paolo's the player that they want to build around regardless. And they may be forced to make that decision. Eventually, I do think either the Orlando Magic are going to find a mix of this talent that works and the right roster around those guys that works, or they're going to be one of these teams that's forced to make that difficult decision. And it's just the reality of it. You don't want to wait until the last year of Franz and Paolo's deals when they're both making $51 million to try to move on from them. Now, the benefit of it is you have 3 more years until you get to that point. But once you do, and if you wait too long, the ability to pivot gets more difficult and more difficult as that goes on. Young teams, especially with players that you drafted that have won, they become expensive even more faster than expected. But at the same time of that, the opposite side of this conversation, Paolo is still developing as a number 1 option. He still is, right? Franz and Bane give the Magic size, shooting, and scoring support for Paolo Banchero, and young core should be judged, should not be judged, I should say, by the same kind of deadlines and timelines of more veteran teams. The Boston Celtics were getting over 30, right? So they were, as you approach that, your timeline becomes a little bit more strenuous. The Cleveland Cavaliers, who we just talked about, Donovan Mitchell's already over 30, right? So the Magic still have more internal development that they want to be on, which puts them ahead of the teams that we talked about before. But the playoff ceiling, if it does not rise soon, and the Orlando Magic make a deep playoff run and feel like a legitimate threat to win a finals or at least the ECF, you could be asking yourself what happens with that young core. This has the young core version of the second tax apron problem already. And in some ways, I would say that it may put a little bit more urgency on it to figure it out. Because like I said, you don't want to get 3-4 years down the road with a 29-year-old Franz and a 28-year-old Paolo, and you have to move those guys. And then the league knows you have to move one of those guys to try to progress forward, because then the value is not going to be as high when it comes down to that. So that's what you're looking at in regards to that. Of course, I like the Orlando Magic roster. I like Franz. I like Paolo a lot. But again, this isn't about if you like the players. It's about the situation that the core and the expense put you in. Next up, the Phoenix Suns, right? Now, the Phoenix Suns aren't necessarily at this problem, and I think they have the cleanest answer. The Devin Booker and Jalen Green are the part of the conversation in this. You're looking at the size of the roster, and I'll say this. I have no doubt that if it gets to this point, the Phoenix Suns are going to choose Desmond Bane. There's just no, they're going to choose Devin Booker. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They're going to choose Devin Booker. Yes, he's making $57 million this year, and the last year of his deal, he was making $68 million in 29-30. But there's no doubt about it that I look at this and I say, there's just no way in hell that they're going to choose Jalen Green, even with Devin Booker being 30 years old now, over Jalen Green. If they're going to make a move off this and they feel their expenses are getting too high, Jalen Green is up out of there. And some may say that Jalen Green is going to be out of there one way or another. And can you even necessarily look at those guys as duos right now? I don't know. Now, they do have $32 million beneath the second tax apron, so they're not nearly close to that. But they are a team that could have to be forced to make a decision, especially with Jalen Green's contract extension coming up sooner rather than later. And that could put them in the position where they're going to have to make a decision on that soon, right? And we'll see what happens in regards to that. Next up, and this is a team that I don't know if I could call it a duo or core or whatever because he hasn't really been there that long. But what the Golden State Warriors eventually do with Jimmy Butler is very interesting to me. Because, this is a team that, it still has runway with Steph Curry. Of course, he's in the last year of his deal, but with Steve Kerr resigning there, wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry are both making $62 and $56 million respectively. And so now with Stephen Curry being there, I think like Jimmy is probably on his way out. And whether that's letting him walk in free agency, but I don't see them maintaining Jimmy Butler for any type of flexibility if they want to do that. They're not a true contender yet. Even if LeBron James goes there, I don't know if I would consider them a true contender at that point. They get a lot more fun, but Jimmy Butler's time is gone. I think the expense, the injuries, the aging part, you're just looking at Jimmy Butler being on his way out, but I don't know if they can trade him. If it wasn't for the ACL injury, maybe, but there was already enough difficulty even getting Jimmy Butler to Golden State when the Miami Heat were trying to trade him. So in this case, I think you're just reaching a more natural conclusion of Jimmy Butler just being let walk away, and that's regardless of it. Now, the next team that I want to talk about is more difficult because this team just won the NBA Finals and a championship, and that's the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks just won the title. So right now, the payroll is going to be justified. And, but you already have their owner coming out and saying that they're not going to pay the second tax apron, right? That they're going to try to avoid that second tax apron. Now, this season they were able to do that. The question then becomes about the New York Knicks. Unless they repeat, and let's say they have a couple of seasons of disappointment, Karl-Anthony Towns is an expiring contract next year. He has a player option for 27-28 at $61 million. You got OG Anunoby making $42 million. His contract comes up at 28-29 at $48 million. You got Jalen Brunson who's getting paid. They're not letting him go. You got Mikal Bridges. I do think that the Knicks, if they do not repeat as champions, right, and I'm not counting them out as that, it is what it is. If they do not repeat as NBA champions and you start looking at that payroll, you could start seeing, especially if they have a disappointing, let's say they get bounced in the first or second round next season, they're going to have to be faced with a tough decision on, to really improve that roster. Do they have to let go of one of the members of their core? And that decision is coming faster than I think a lot of people want to realize in regards to it. Yes, they just won a title. Yes, it's fun, all that type of stuff. But, winning is going to protect them. And that's the case there. Winning protects them. You won a title, so you're going to justify the payroll for now. Jalen Brunson is the identity. OG Anunoby gives them so much value. Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns are high-level talents that fit around Jalen Brunson, and championship teams are going to be given the benefit of the doubt. But I do think one step back could change everything for this. Cat's massive salary. Bridges is expensive and could become a very movable piece, especially for what they gave up on him. This core takes up a huge chunk of the salary cap. And if the Knicks do stop winning, and that's the biggest thing here, if they stop winning, the payroll becomes a debate immediately the moment that they stop winning. And with the second tax apron limits, how easily you can move from around the edges, I think that's going to be there. The Knicks are going to be safe, especially after winning a title, as long as they keep winning. The second they stop, the second it gets a disappointment, the second a player gets a major injury and it derails their season, that salary is going to start becoming a conversation and a talking point on what happens next for that team. And there you go in regards to that one. And the last team that I want to talk about in regards to it as well is Philly. Philly is a team that I think you have to look at here. At this point now with Jaylen Brown, Embiid, Maxey, these players all having major salaries in regards to this one, they're going to have to prove that this works. And because this team is newly constructed and put together, I think that it may put even more pressure on them to show right away. You have Joel Embiid, who's making $57 million. Jaylen Brown, who's making $57 million next year. Tyrese Maxey, who's making $40 million. And while there's no other player on that team other than VJ Edgecombe making double-digit million, the next closest to that is Dean Wade at $9 million. You got flexibility around there, but best believe, I do think that this could set up, especially with Jaylen Brown, Tyrese Maxey, and VJ Edgecombe, looks like a core that can push in the Eastern Conference. You could start seeing the 76ers look at Joel Embiid and say, hey, we finally are in a situation where if we find a starting caliber defensive-minded center, it may be time to move off of Joel Embiid. So, the fact that they are going to be under pressure because this team just got together is a thing there. But with Joel Embiid's health, and if it continues to limit the playoff runs, I think that pressure grows a lot on this team. I think Brown definitely improves the roster, but he also raises expectations because you made that trade for him. And Philly can't afford to have another expensive roster that is going to start failing in May. Now, on the flip side of this, it's way too early to judge. Jaylen Brown is still in his prime. Maxey is young and ascending. Embiid, when healthy, is still a dominant force. And this core may just need enough time together to be able to do it and achieve what they need to achieve. And Philly, it made win now move, and it deserves a real run before you even ask this question. Again, this isn't saying immediately now or even at this trade deadline, but it is something to look out for as you continue with this team, because I do think, hey, we'll see what's going to happen here. But let me know what you guys think on those teams down below. Which team do you think may be forced to make a big decision with its core sooner rather than later? Let me know that down below. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode or a live stream. You can follow us at the Full Court YT. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. The NBA show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything basketball and NBA related. And I'll catch you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
Been a presentation of the Breaks Media.